So think of applications now outside of like, people think of Uniswap, they think of trading, which is its core use case. But now think of all these other applications to do other DeFi things, to buy NFTs, to play games. They make sense for scale reasons to be on their own L2s, or some of them do at least. But if that's the world, you also want a user that has a home base where the majority of their funds live. And you want that home base to then be a remote control to do things on the other chains. I like to think of it as like a remote control where I don't necessarily need to send money there. I can just go and do an action on that other chain and control it and pay for it from my home place. And I think, we got to see how that network structure evolves. But Unichain, what we're doing with Intents, I think we're very well positioned to make that also be a reality, to support all these applications happening on their own chain. But I control it from my home.
Today's guests are Hayden Adams, the founder and CEO of Uniswap Labs, and Hart Lambur, the co-founder and CEO of Across. Uniswap is probably the best known DEX in the Ethereum ecosystem. It does billions and billions of dollars in monthly volume. And Across is an interoperability platform that is actually helping Uniswap Labs now. Last month, Uniswap Labs announced it was launching Unichain, a new L2 chain built on the OP stack. And Across is going to work with them to help deploy cross-chain swaps and being a bridging partner. In simple terms, it's going to help people move crypto from one chain to another in an easier way. I'm excited to talk with both Hayden and Hart about Unichain, Across, and more. Guys, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
For sure. To start off, I always like asking my guests, can you tell us briefly a bit about yourself and how you got into this space? People might know you guys, but still got to ask.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm happy to kick off. I'm Hayden. I got into the space about 7.5 years ago. And, I had a friend who was working at the Ethereum Foundation at the time. And I was just interested in some of the ideas, but I wasn't really sure. And I decided to, teach myself to program with Solidity. And I just immediately got pretty fascinated by the idea of building applications that people could use money, put their money in, they could trust it. They could coordinate, without having to trust a single person or a single single company, but you could just trust that the code did what it said it could do. This was before the word DeFi even existed, but it was this concept behind it. And so I decided to try to build a project. I built this initial thing that ultimately became Uniswap, and I'm still working on it 7 years later.
Amazing. Hart, what about you?
Yeah, so I have a computer science background, but I actually worked in finance for about 8 years through the financial crisis. As a trader, market maker, which actually kind of informs some of the Across design and how it works, which maybe we'll get into. I had a fintech business that got acquired, and then got into crypto full time, kind of around the same time Hayden did. Actually, I think we first met before you had a single employee at Uniswap. So I think I know you from, employee one status. Yeah. So my first project in crypto is UMA, an oracle for long tail data prediction markets, best known to power Polymarket right now. And out of that actually spun up Across this intent-based interoperability protocol that kind of combines, my interests in financial markets, incentive structures, mechanism design, computer science, blockchains, lots of fun stuff that are all kind of wrapped up into that architecture.
Sure. And we'll tie in Across into a lot of this episode. But to start with Uniswap's launching of its own L2 called Unichain, what was kind of the decision process behind that? Why create this? Why now? And how does that tie into Uniswap's billions of dollars in TVL and volume?
Yeah. So I think that, when I think about blockchain scaling, we're actually in what I would call our awkward teenage years. Okay. It's we've gone from this early stage where it's just a baby and everything can run on one chain. Essentially, all Ethereum applications in the early days, it's an initial set of DeFi protocols, for example, they all just ran on Ethereum, and it just worked. And you could build relatively simple user experiences on top of it. And there were challenges, of course, self-custody, et cetera. But what we're starting to see is that we're scaling up, right? And we need to be able to run more applications. And when it comes to like scaling computing and scaling, traditional computing systems, there's like basically two models. There's vertical scaling, which is like I have run my thing on a beefier and beefier machine, and then there's horizontal scaling. I run more and more machines. And when you think about what Ethereum's like roadmap is, when people talk about layer twos and layer two scaling, and this roll-up centric roadmap is like the technical term people are using for it. It's really about horizontally scaling Ethereum. How can we have more and more chains running in parallel? And the cool thing about vertical scaling is capped out at like what you can run on one machine. So it really caps out pretty quickly. Horizontal scaling caps out at how easily can you coordinate and move things in between different machines, essentially. And so we're in this transition phase of going from one chain to many chains. And the biggest challenge that we face in doing that is, how do you coordinate resources across the chains? How do you make the user experience of interacting with many chains a very good one? And when you look at like parallels from before, from outside of blockchains, people have managed to make applications that use multiple servers, and it still feels and looks good. And you've abstracted away from users. And so when it comes to like Unichain, a lot of what we're looking at is how can we, one, we're going to clearly have to scale through horizontal scaling, and how can we create a user experience where you can use the application of Uniswap and you can use DeFi and have it feel like it's all within one chain across many. And I think Unichain is part of that story. And so we have a whole host of technical innovations that we're bringing to the table. We have a host of decentralization features, trying to further the decentralization of layer two scaling, make sure that we stay true to our roots there. And that's kind of what goes into Unichain, is how can we just advance the space and continue to improve what we've been building for the past many years.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of different L2s out there, all kind of working to scale Ethereum. I know before we started recording, Hart talked about how, in the past, the biggest problem with Ethereum was scaling it. And now there's more to be done, essentially. And the next one, I would argue, is probably fixing the fragmentation and bringing it all together, to Hayden's point, right? And it's funny that it's called Unichain. Is that because it's like one chain, even though or is that just a play off Uniswap?
I think Uni is like a fun prefix.
Yeah,
exactly.
There we go. It's two birds, one stone. Hart, go ahead.
Yeah, Jacquelyn, just to like riff on that, and it just sort of maybe repeats Hayden's point in a different light. We go back, and 4 years ago, Ethereum's biggest problem was scalability. It was just like, how are we going to scale this single chain? And the ecosystem aligned on this roll-up centric roadmap, and then they executed on it, and it worked. I think it's really this year. It really isn't that long ago, but March of this year, with the Denkun hard fork and like this blobs coming online, it made any individual L2 really fast and really cheap. So Unichain, when it rolls out, but Unichain testnet, super fast and super cheap. Unichain is going to be super fast and super cheap. It is a Solana-like experience on that chain. And we have ridiculous scalability, like Hayden said. You want more scale, just add another L2 or L3, and we just keep scaling horizontally. So there's one point that I think like is lost in the current like crypto Twitter narrative. We should celebrate that Ethereum solved the big hairy problem and solved it pretty effectively. The kind of the next thing though is like, okay, well, solving that problem introduced this other problem.
More problems,
more problems. It doesn't, never ending, right? But the new problem is, how do we make all of these L2s and L3s and all these chains feel like one thing, feel like one unified Ethereum again? And I'm pretty hopeful that like the Ethereum ecosystem, and we're working a lot with Uniswap and with Hayden on this, to try to align that the next big problem for Ethereum to solve is this interoperability problem. I don't even know if we call it interoperability, but I want to call it like unify Ethereum. How do we make this feel like one network again? And I think the architecture that Across is built on, which Uniswap is very much aligned on, is how we kind of got together this intent-based architecture for bridging, is I think the only viable architecture to offer a very fast experience between these blockchains. Internally, we like to talk about like a 2-second experience going between blockchains. And I actually think that's important because, normie users, the next billion crypto users, they're not here to wait a minute or 40 seconds or even 20 seconds to go and use this stuff. It's got to feel as fast as a website. And a lot of like Web 2 UX research really harps on the fact that if your web page loads in more than 2 seconds, users just leave. They're like, that's too long.
I was going to say, if my phone takes a while, I'm like checking the Wi-Fi or like refreshing the page. Like people don't have the patience anymore. Yeah, go ahead, Hayden.
2 seconds might be about 10 times too long. We're targeting like 200 milliseconds, 250 milliseconds for most actions, which is conveniently the block times that we're targeting for Unichain.
Well, these are the two numbers that I think matter. Like 200 milliseconds is the limit of human perception. So something happens in 200 milliseconds, it feels instant. You like see it as instant. 2 seconds seems to be this other psychological limit of like how long I'm willing to wait before my mind wanders and like I go do the next thing. So yeah, Hayden, we've got Unichain having 250 millisecond block times. It's going to feel instant when you click and do things on Unichain. And then cross-chain or interoperability, I want to get there too. But like across right now, our median fill time is 3 seconds. So we're getting closer to that 2 second number. But I think there's things we can do, particularly with faster block times, that will get this to 1 second, 500 milliseconds, keep getting faster.
What would you say is the current speed right now for, other chains or just in general across the Ethereum ecosystem with L2s?
I think most L2s are in like the 1 to 2 seconds range about. And then L1 is like 12 seconds.
Okay. And there's on the interoperability, the bridging's slow. And we can, for like a 2 second kind of sidebar, kind of traditional bridging, you deposit on a chain, you wait for finality on that chain or a sense of finality, then you send a message to the other chain and release funds. And that kind of traditional architecture, the problem is you're like waiting for finality, and that can be really slow. The intent architecture, which is what Across is based on and what Uniswap X is based on, we flip that around and we say, don't wait for finality. Don't send a message. We actually have this network of third-party actors, call them solvers, relayers, fillers, that front capital. They actually lend money to the user on the destination chain near instantly. So the user gets an extremely fast fill. And then the protocol verifies that the quote unquote intent was filled before it releases the funds back to the user. So it's like an architectural shift that sidesteps some of the constraints between connecting these blockchains and puts us on our architecture to have this really fast interop experience. Kind of sidebar, but I think it's relevant to the viewers and listeners.
Okay. One thing that might be interesting for me to quickly touch on is, we're actually working at Uniswap with a lot of partners on these projects, right? We're working with Across on this interoperability standard. We're also working with Flashbots and Optimism on Unichain. And I think part of something like worth thinking about or noting here is that, the reason that the internet just works, right? I can take a photo, I can send it to my friend, they can post it to Twitter, someone else can download it and email it to someone else, and it all just flows. And there's a lot of different systems. And the reason the internet just works is because we have these very standardized information sharing protocols. And it's not too different from what we talk about in blockchains. When we talk about decentralized protocols, it's just instead of information sharing protocols, it's value sharing protocols. And that's what, tokens are. Tokens are like the file formats. And, so we have all these different systems. And, when it comes to how do you make something that just works, I think that one friction point that crypto often has in trying to solve problems is people often pick and choose a very narrow sliver of the tech stack. In crypto, they're we're this infrastructure layer and we do this thing, and every problem that these people have their problems and that's their problem. These people have their problems, that's their problem. But the problem is that the actual friction points lie at the intersections. And that's even why we, for example, built a mobile wallet. We already had our web app and people could already use third-party mobile wallets. But when we looked at our support tickets, 95% of them were related to the user experience of the wallets and not to the user experience of our app. And so we couldn't improve the user experience of our app without getting into the wallet territory. And that has helped us further, even wallet standards. And we've helped get adoption of standards for how wallets connect to websites, because we were able to like identify these problems. And so I think in a very similar, one of the reasons that we're working with a lot of people and why I'm excited about our Uniswap Labs in particular, we try to build very full stack. We have this user-facing application, which currently has millions of users. We also helped build this decentralized trading protocol that has also millions of users and billions of dollars flowing through it. And we're kind of going further down the stack in terms of chain development. We're going further up the stack in terms of wallet development. And what that gives us is it allows us to really we don't really get to push our problems onto another party because we're kind of building at every level of the stack. So as a wallet, we're like, well, that's the blockchain's problem, then we just create a problem for us, building at the chain level. And so I think that, to kind of create standards and have them be adopted, one other problem we have, that people run into is they try to create a standard and no one uses it. And so what we're trying to do is use our kind of expertise building full stack, plus our kind of position as a team that has the significant adoption in products across the stack, to partner with other people in the industry to try to create standards for how to transmit value on blockchains that we think will basically help solve the friction points in using blockchains. It's kind of like a subtle, nuanced point to what we're trying to do, but I think something that I'm personally very excited about.
Yeah, well, and then Hayden, you got it. Well, Jacquelyn, we'll let you ask us questions here too.
No,
but it's a perfect segue.
Go ahead.
It's a perfect segue to talk about the standard that Across and Uniswap co-authored for cross-chain intents. So this is our bridging architecture, bridging and swapping architecture. We put together a standard called ERC 7683. I'm sure it's
good to have you here because I always forget that number.
Give me some layman's terms on that.
8, 5.
It's
instead of an acronym, Hart, explain it to us like we're not involved, because I'm not
absolutely
involved.
Absolutely, but it is a number we were assigned. Unfortunately, Hayden and I, we were trying to get a better number than 7683, but we ended up.
And you have people like ERC 404; they're just choosing their number as if they're not even using that.
That's messed up. You guys gotta call someone.
They don't even realize that these numbers come from a formal process, and so they just pick a number and they're like, "We're this number now."
I didn't even know it was a formal process, to be honest. That's interesting that you were assigned a number. I'm learning.
We are assigned a number, and the number we got is 7683. Hayden, you got to start remembering
7682. That's what we'll name that.
I can't.
83, Jacquelyn.
Oh, 83. Yeah. I'm sorry. 82 is already taken.
Exactly. It's impossible.
It's a standard for cross-chain intents. So most of the audience will know ERC 20, like a standard for what a token looks like. And I think the mental model is ERC 20, it's the shape of a token. This token will have these features. It has approval functions, that kind of stuff. It becomes a standard that people can adopt and then plug in different places. The standard that we've co-authored, 7683, is basically, my mental model is it's a standard for an order ticket for a cross-chain action. And so you can think of this order ticket as specifying, I have asset X on chain A, I want asset Y on chain B. Maybe there's some other stuff I want to do on chain B, and I define the shape of that order ticket. And then I can send it into this solver network that will go and complete it. And so, the whole concept behind this is, can we define this common order ticket in a way that scales Ethereum? It's not owned by any one protocol. It truly is an open standard. And it just helps us make this seamless 2-second or 200 millisecond interoperability happen.
And hopefully everyone would adopt it.
I think that the goal of a standard is not to own the thing, but to help further and get adoption of it. And so the way we got here is that Across was building Across, and it was an intents-based bridging thing. And we were building something we called cross-chain Uniswap X. Uniswap X was our approach to essentially kind of aggregating all sorts of liquidity sources and moving towards an intents-based trading design. And then we, came up with our design for cross-chain Uniswap X. And by the way, I love simple protocols. Uniswap's, the core protocol was X times Y equals K. And, the cross-chain Uniswap X, the idea was let's hand wave everything and say, I can express an order. So someone can express an order, someone else can fill it, and you can have an arbitrary implementation of what that looks like. And we realized, what we're building looks kind of the same you could express across orders kind of in a Uniswap. So we just did the work to have it so that the orders that we were working towards and the orders they were working towards, could it be expressed in the exact same format? Because we thought, that's much nicer. We can share infrastructure. Anything that works for cross-chain Uniswap X will also work for Across and vice versa. And so we aligned on a standard. We would love for other people to adopt the standard. If there are things within the standard, by bringing multiple people, we were able to see there's issues Across has, there's issues we have. How can we make it work for both? As new people come in, there might be things that we didn't anticipate. And so I think that the standard could improve, could evolve. We tried to make it as flexible and general purpose as possible. But maybe some other, if other people want to collaborate on the standard, they want to bring their own ideas. That's that would be great, because we do want to create something that works. For a lot of use cases.
Of course.
Yeah, Hayden, I should update you. I haven't talked with you about this in a second, but we've got 30 teams supporting the standard now. Nice. It's actually they're being announced now as we speak, but
amazing.
It's been pretty cool, teams? And it's. I won't share. I don't know who's all been announced, but it is Optimism supports it, Uniswap supports it. Other big L2 ecosystems like Polygon has already announced their support for it. Scroll and Linea, which are other L2 ecosystems. I won't share the rest, but I think that they will too. And then a bunch of other intent-based protocols have supported this. One Balance and Rhinestone, and it's just I can't even name all of them, but it's been pretty cool because people are okay, this does seem like a useful thing to align around. And again, I just want to emphasize and reiterate that it is an open standard. It's just the shape of what an order ticket looks like. And the more people we can have adopt it, I think it's just the better it is for Ethereum.
I can also talk a little bit if it's helpful, but I also don't want to just take over. I'm sure you have other questions.
You guys keep ping-ponging back and forth. Yeah. I'm happy for it.
I could talk a little bit about what we're the user experience that we're ultimately trying to create in our products, right? Because we have an end user experience in mind here that is different from today's user experience of using Uniswap. So,
how would you define user experience today for both Web3 users and the normie quote unquote audiences? And then to your point, how does that kind of evolve?
Yeah, I think that our user experience, we're kind of always our own biggest critics. The initial success of Uniswap was actually built on people feeling this is the first thing in Ethereum that feels usable. And I think for the past 7 years, we've just been perpetually frustrated with ourselves for not it feeling too hard still to use. And I think that gets at for a new person landing for the first time, it really depends on what you're comparing against, right? So if you're comparing creating a wallet to creating a bank account, it's actually really easy. You have to go to a store in person versus just downloading an app. When it comes to the exact interaction patterns of websites, using Robinhood versus using Uniswap to trade, or using Coinbase, the retail app, versus using one of these various DeFi interfaces, there are friction points that make it very challenging for new users. And an increasing one, when everything was on Ethereum, we had a few friction points around, we hadn't figured out, it was the 12-second time was too slow. It started to get more and more expensive, and bad price is a bad UX. And so we start to solve these problems, but now we have this problem where when you search ETH in Uniswap's token, we try to have support for as many chains and as many tokens as possible. But when you go to Uniswap's interface and you search ETH, you actually see 13 versions of ETH. You see ETH on mainnet, you see ETH on Base, you see ETH on Optimism, on Arbitrum. You have we're starting to get this fragmentation of assets across chains, and they look like they're different assets almost. And you have to personally manage what chain you're connected to, what chain you're depositing to, and that experience is really tough for new users to crypto. And there might be people who are very advanced users today's user base, that are comfortable navigating the networks. But the way that I relate what this is, it's almost like if you had to, when you're using an email app, to email one person, you had to switch your the Amazon server you're connected to. It's crazy. And then even the gas cost is that passing on and displaying the server fees directly to end users. And it's partially because it used to be so expensive. Once we get cheap enough, front ends will be able to just pay these fees on behalf of their users, the same way that they pay server fees. And we'll be able to simplify. And then the goal is to just create a user experience where you have one list of tokens. Those tokens might be on any given chain, and you can convert between any two tokens the same way you could on Coinbase or Binance or whatever.
And you don't need to know.
And you don't need to know, and it's fast. It costs less than a cent in fee, and it takes less than a sec. It takes less than a second, ideally 250 milliseconds. And it doesn't matter what two assets you're selected. And today, if you're trading from one base asset to another asset on base, it does feel like that. If you're trading on one asset to Arbitrum to another asset on Arbitrum, it does feel like that. But it doesn't feel like that when you move between chains. And we also have this like duplication of assets across chains. So it's kind of like the user experience that we think is possible in the next year is you just go back to the model of UC1 list. Everything is fast and cheap. There is a thing, which is you have to onboard people to layer 2s, not to layer 1s. The current today, Ethereum layer 1 is like almost like a hub for activity. People all onboard to L1 and then they move into these L2s using these bridging protocols, like across. But then every user is subject to L1 costs and L1 speeds, which are, and I think that inherently and by intention, by design, L1 is meant to be slower and more expensive because it's maximizing to be a decentralized layer for settling L2 proving systems, essentially. And so, our goal is to say, like, onboard users directly into a layer 2, have them be able to, buy assets across any layer 2, have it be, have it only be one list of tokens, and it's fast and it's cheap. And that's when we can start to have a user experience where we're actually beating CeFi on both fronts. We're beating CeFi in that you can you don't need to go into store to create a bank account. You can just download an app, you create your own wallet and self-custody your own funds. But you also don't have to deal with this bizarre user experience that doesn't exist outside of decentralized finance and Web3.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask, do you see a future where people just go straight to L2s opposed to going to L1s, especially for Ethereum?
Well, Hayden, I just say I think that's got to be the vision for Unichain too.
Right.
It's users onboard in the Unichain and it becomes a home or a hub for their activity. Right.
I think it's essentially not. I think that Ethereum. I think it would be a mistake for Ethereum to try to be the place everyone onboards to. I think of Ethereum, Ethereum's goal today, as I interpret it, is to be extremely decentralized and where the highest value things happen. And those highest value things are maybe being the ultimate settlement layer for if you have a wallet with $1 billion of ETH, yes, keep it on Ethereum. Don't put it on an L2. If you have, but if you're but the cool thing with L2s is essentially they're compressing a lot of activity into smaller amounts of data that can be posted to the L1. Yeah. And so I think that, Ethereum should continue to optimize for decentralization, which will inherently, mean being a little bit slower, being a little bit more expensive. And it should just, allow these L2s to, most users should onboard to an L2. They should primarily transact on an L2, and nothing should ever really touch the L1 except these very compressed proofs of what's happening on the L2. And that's how Ethereum scales, right? We, to many, many, many more users, to many more transactions. There's these kind of current debates in Ethereum Twitter that I don't think we really need to get into about should Ethereum be primarily optimized for being the place that people do all their activity? I think that would be a pretty big mistake because really it just doesn't scale as a model, and we just need to figure out, and people have this sort of negative take on L2s because we're in the early days of trying to make the user experience of L2s good. And that's what we're trying to advance with Unichain, with the EIP 7683.
Got it.
Correct.
Nailed
nice.
it.
That's what we're trying to, what we're trying to advance there. We're trying to work through those friction points. Some people think it's just some people just want to give up on them and just go back to trying to run everything on one chain. And I think that would be a big mistake personally. And so, we think Unichain can be a place that we onboard users to, but we also can onboard users to other chains, the other scalable L2 chains. But the point is, making sure that they're connected so that users really should only be onboarded to a chain that can be very quickly and cheaply connected to every other chain we support. That's the real vision. And Unichain can kind of optimize for really connecting very quickly and cheaply to other chains so that you can route between chains. And that can be sort of a way of really, scaling up.
Do you think this is something that the millions of Uniswap users want? And if not, or if so, what else do they want? What would Unichain bring them that they can't already get?
Yeah, we set up sort of almost product principles where we think Uniswap users basically want a vast selection of assets. We're moving towards a world of it's kind of the difference between Netflix versus YouTube for markets. People can create their own market, and people want, and that's what tokens really are. Is anyone can create a market. It's a lowered barrier to doing that, and so we think people want a vast selection of assets. We think that people want a very simple user experience. And a lot of what we're talking about here is essentially how we get to that simple user experience, how we make that vast selection of assets accessible. And then we ultimately think users want a very low cost. And so those are like the three product principles we have. And all three of them fit very nicely within the vision of Unichain. It's kind of part of how we achieve it. It's also part of how, it's also fits very nicely with the vision of this new standard, trading cross-chain standard, and how we achieve that. So yeah, we're just trying to like bring the things that users want to them. And I think that people don't always know like how blockchains will or should scale. I think they just are like, I don't know. I don't want to be confused by this thing I'm trying to, I want to just buy a thing.
Yeah.
And have it be simple and fast and cheap.
Mm-hmm. Hart, what's your take? I see you thinking.
I was just going to add one more thing. So in addition to all those kind of principles you laid out, I also think in this world of potentially thousands or millions of rollups, where all these rollups are their own application. So think of applications now outside of like, people think of Uniswap, they think of trading, which is its core use case. But now think of all these other applications to do other DeFi things, to buy NFTs, to play games. They make sense for scale reasons to be on their own L2s, or some of them do at least. But if that's the world, you also want a user that has a home base where the majority of their funds live. And you want that home base to then be a remote control to do things on the other chains. I like to think of it as like a remote control where I don't necessarily need to send money there. I can just go and do an action on that other chain and control it and pay for it from my home place. And I think, we got to see how that network structure evolves. But Unichain, what we're doing with Intents, I think we're very well positioned to make that also be a reality, to support all these applications happening on their own chain. But I control it from like my home base.
Yeah. One kind of funny thing that maybe I could try to almost right now you have basically the top application on most chains is either Uniswap or a fork of Uniswap. And most of these chains are trying to be like very general purpose. And to Hart's point, like the way you actually AMMs are actually like counterproductive to scaling a chain, if that makes sense. Like AMMs create a constant arbitrage opportunity that basically consumes all available block space. And if you want to scale up and if you're trying to build an application with a goal, you actually don't necessarily want to be on a chain with an AMM, because the AMM is going to raise your gas costs, because it's just and so if your intention is low cost, which is what your intention should be, right? Then you actually probably will want to build like a focused layer 2, and then if you need to access liquidity, you'll want to trade through another chain. And so Unichain will be a thing that people can connect their chains to trade through it, but you actually don't want the AMM on your chain. And we're in this funny thing where we have a lot of general purpose L2s and they're all competing with each other. And so they all want to be like the biggest hub for DeFi because it's a big opportunity and what's working in blockchains today. Mm-hmm. But as it scales, you're going to have more and more use cases which really shouldn't want Uniswap on their chain. They should want to connect to Uniswap because, it will just raise connect, having a local Uniswap deployment will inherently increase the fees of the entire chain. Because it just creates constant trading and constant arbitrage, and that uses resources that could otherwise be used for your users to send lower cost payments or to do actions within a game and so I think that's part of another thing that why we're interested in Unichain in general is trying to just advance this space to get to this next stage where people are not just competing with each other to be general purpose hubs, but able to focus on specific use cases and making them low cost, not high cost. There's this funny inverse thing, which is the kind of profit model of an L2 ecosystem is how much people are paying, but that's inversely proportional to what people building applications want, which is they want the lowest possible fees for their users. Anyway,
So would you say Unichain really wants to not be general purpose and more focused on trading and DeFi, or you do want it to be general purpose?
I think it's focused on DeFi. I think that funny thing is even being focused on DeFi, you need the expressiveness of general purpose, but I think it's about what the chain is focused on. And I think we're going to see that you have a lot of servers and they all can run arbitrary, you have Turing complete programming languages. Arbitrary servers can run arbitrary things, but they end up becoming hotspots for certain things. And we think that what we're building can be a very good hotspot for DeFi and things that should co-locate with things like Uniswap. And so even we have this Uniswap v4 coming, we probably shouldn't get into that whole territory. Part of what we're doing with Uniswap v4 is making the protocol more expressive and letting people program arbitrary pool implementations. To do that, you need a general purpose chain. So it needs to be like a general purpose chain for expressiveness, but I'd say that like L2s should overall focus on what applications they're building for, what services they're providing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the last major questions I want to ask you guys is like, what would you say is the biggest opportunities for L2s today, aside from the obvious ones, or maybe the ones we really dove into in this episode, like something that hasn't been touched on yet that needs to be? Because like, one problem's fixed, then we get another and another. But what else are you two eyeing?
So one way to maybe think about this, okay, so I agree with Hayden's focus, like Unichain as a home for DeFi. I think that's your tagline, right, Hayden? Like the new home
something
for
like
DeFi.
That.
You should know this too. 7683
like
plus.
Yeah.
Your
the
home
tagline
for DeFi.
7863.
It's the tagline.
Yeah.
I'm just playing.
I'll get the number right by the end of this episode.
But one of the things I kind of like to think about is like, let's analogize to like Web 2 flows. So what are some Web 2 use cases here? A Web 2 use case, one is like a store. I want to sell a good. And let's say that increasingly I want to sell digital goods. So I have, and you can think NFT as an example, but like I'll just abstract it to a digital good. What do I want in my Web 2 experience? I have a shopping cart. I add things to my shopping cart and I check out and I pay for it. And I have multiple payment options. I could pay with Google Pay, Apple Pay, PayPal, my credit card, whatever else. So to kind of answer your question, I think as we move into this more digital, like blockchain centric world, I can imagine there being lots of use cases where people have stores that are selling digital goods. They could have their own L2, their own server for their digital goods. And your checkout experience here is when I go to buy my digital good, I want to be able to pay for it from any chain, seamlessly, fast, easy. Like that's another use case. And another flow I think of, if you think of Web 2 fintech applications, like a Web 2 fintech application, what does the onboarding flow look like? I mean, the first thing you have to do is fund your fintech application, fund your Robinhood account, fund your Schwab account, fund your whatever it is. And if I think about as we implement and have more and more DeFi, more and more innovation around what a kind of Web3 fintech app can be, you also have this funding flow where you want to have the user be able to fund that new, onboard the user and have them fund from any chain seamlessly and quickly. So those are kind of the types of things where I'm thinking, where can these L2s go and expand that are credible use cases? I'm curious to hear Hayden's thoughts too. Like, what are the other?
Oh my.
I have like a boring set of ones, and then I have a spicy set of ones. Maybe I don't know if spicy is the right word.
Click
but
on the boring.
I feel like
let's get to
my boring.
Yeah,
no. The boring ones are just like, I'm very excited to like remove like credit card fees. Like 3% credit card fees are just not like, are just extractive to society. I think we can lower that to like 0.1%, 0.01%. Like getting the user experience of crypto to the point where we can remove credit card fees, we can remove wire transfer fees, we can just make like every like friction point where value is extracted like dramatically lower. I think that's like a very boring one, but like lowering costs across the board for like pretty much every financial use case. And I think that like crypto.
Pause for 1 second though. Yeah. It's not boring. It's like payments are like a core useful thing that is way too expensive now. It's like it should be. I think we get too excited about other stuff when it's so important to do that well.
I think it's extremely important. By boring, I just mean it's not like it's just like let's make everything
yield.
It's not exactly. And no, so I just make everything cheap. It's actually very doable, and I think that like just high fee. And then the other one I think that's pretty interesting to me is about like where value flows in the world essentially, and some of the new models that are being pioneered by tokens and token projects, and how tokens relate to users and applications. Essentially, like, the like sort of like traditional model for like how projects and products get built is like you have like one of a few options. You have like people build things, like certain protocols get built in nonprofits, and then you have like organizations that do equity, and then they raise a seed round, and then they eventually IPO, right? And you have these like that's like one model for how to like build things, and I think that what crypto almost represents is an opportunity to explore new and different models for how to build things and how to distribute value. And when you look at like the value flow and the kind of user rights and the user kind of safety and user participation within these traditional models. I think that I think that essentially, a lot of people get screwed, and that there's like a disproportionate value flow to the actual creators. And I know that's kind of not the creators of like content, but the creators of products. Like more or less, like I think that like almost all value, when you think of like a product like YouTube, right? Mm-hmm. Like there was so much value created by the creators of YouTube, and there was so much value created by their investors and shareholders, for sure. Like in a huge amount of value, and billions of dollars in value. But there was this like other set of participants that kind of got completely screwed along the way, which is like, how much value for the YouTube shareholders did the first YouTuber with 1 million followers create?
Right.
Probably like also billions of dollars in value. But they didn't see any of it. And I think that like, there's all sorts of like complexity around legal, regular, blah, blah, blah. But like when you actually like zoom out, part of what token projects pioneer is how can products and ecosystems and protocols have direct relationships with their users and give users direct rights and direct ownership. And I think that can create a much healthier value chain for society that more fairly distributes and gives more value to like people that create it, essentially. So I think that like the current system kind of works for like the wealthiest, but it doesn't really work for like the kind of the smaller projects, and a lot of people kind of get just crushed or under rewarded, and there's very little you can do about it. And so I think that crypto just like represents an ability to improve on that model. And I think that like even having like tokens, you can create things they don't have to look like a traditional organizational structure. You can create things that look like a direct participation or some sort of utility within a system as part of that. But anyway, I find that very interesting, and I'm personally very excited about that as well.
Yeah, me too. 100%. You got me excited about it. Like, I agree with you. Like, I'm nodding if people aren't watching this. But to wrap things up, Hart and Hayden, I always ask my guests to leave us with a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you throughout your time in this industry. So share some insights with the class, please.
Okay. Keep trucking, I think, would be my advice. Right. Like, and I think Hayden, you and I both do this. It's like, keep building stuff, keep heading in the right direction. I think it's very applicable to Ethereum right now, where, there's like sort of negative sentiment on the timeline. But Ethereum keeps solving hard problems. I think this problem of unifying Ethereum, like we have the building blocks. It is like awkward teenage years, like Hayden said. But I think, I really like this idea of connecting all our chains. It's a hard problem, but we keep trucking and we are whittling away and solving it.
Yeah, mine isn't too different. I think that like there's just a lot of value to focus, and I think that it's a very volatile industry. At times you have prices, but also like sentiment and narratives, and it moves very fast. And I think to succeed within that, one, you need to focus, and two, you need to have like some long-term conviction and beliefs, and like not second guess them or question them every month as the winds shift. And so I think that like, yeah, just focus on long-term conviction and first principles thinking is kind of my high-level advice to people if they want to build something good and useful.
Yes. Keep trucking and a high-level conviction. Thank you, Hayden and Hart, for coming on today. This was fun.
Yeah, it's great.
Super fun. Thanks for letting us talk so much.
That's what we have you here for. Talk soon, guys.
Cheers. Thanks.